Good morning, everyone. Thank you for attending this session in the Security and Architecture track about safeguarding the security posture of your AD pre and post attack. So my name is Jorge de Almeida Pinto. I'm a senior architecture and also senior incident response lead working for Semperis. I've been working with identity and security and recovery for many years, done quite a lot of experience around those topics. Semperis is, in short, a cybersecurity company providing both products and services for before the attack, during the attack, and after the attack. So one of the things that you always should remember is on the internet, there's always somebody trying to attack your network. And as soon as they succeed to enter your network and get a foothold in your network, this is one of the nodes that you might see. And when you see something like this, which in this case is a ransomware node, you'll be having a very bad day, especially if it concerns your domain controllers. Because if it concerns your domain controllers, then probably everything is down or will be down or is going to be down very quickly. So what can you do about this? Well, in this scenario, after a ransomware attack, obvious solution is to recover from that. We'll talk about it a little bit later, but it's also important to understand what can you do together with partners and maybe other companies, I don't know, in the same work area that you are in. What can you do to prevent you can even get into this state? Well, apparently, the things that you should do pre-attack, obviously, is to secure and protect your AD. It's not just by doing a few things and reactively. No, you need to proactively search and fix, in other words, continuously assess the security of your AD by having a look at so-called indicators of exposure. Indicators of exposure are basically metrics that tell you that your, in this case, Active Directory, obviously, has weaknesses, and you need to solve those weaknesses before somebody else uses those weaknesses against you to, at some point in time, present you that so very not so nice ransomware node. How do you do that? You can use all kinds of tooling by either creating it yourself, like you see in the upper right corner, by doing it, for example, in PowerShell. I've done that in the past to, for example, have a look at account settings, but also go very deep into the passwords to understand how weak or how strong they were, together with specific tooling, and also have using the Have Been Pond database. But you should also have a look at security-related configurations. Third-party tooling that's out there, and there are many out there that are free, are, for example, the Semperis Purple Night tooling that takes a look, that takes a snapshot of your AD, but also your Azure AD, and then presents you in a nice report what is good and not so good about it. The not so good is obvious, the things that you need to pay attention to. When you look at Certified, that tool goes a little bit deeper into your certificate authority, but also certificate templates configuration, and gives you a deeper view of how things are. Grouper is a third-party tooling, both on GitHub, by the way, that gives you a deeper look into the configuration of your group policy objects. So by using these tools, you can get a deeper understanding on how good or how bad things are. But this is, as how I call them, the static configurations of your Active Directory. You also need to have a look at the invisible attack paths. For those attack paths, let's call it invisible, because they are not necessarily invisible, but they are not clear, because the attack paths are a combination of configurations in your Active Directory. And that's why I'm saying it's not really visible for you as a human. By using tooling like Forest Druid from Semperis or Bloodhound, you can get a deeper understanding on how the things are. Bloodhound is a tool that is being used by attackers, obviously, and it gives you basically all the attack paths into your tier 0, because the tier 0, that's what the attackers are interested in. Forest Druid and the other, so Bloodhound is from the outside in. Forest Druid, however, does the exact same thing, but takes another approach. It takes the approach of inside out. Forest Druid with inside out means it looks at your tier 0 and then sees everything that interacts with the tier 0, and then you only need to pay attention on that stuff that interacts with your tier 0, not necessarily everything. In addition, looking at indicators of compromise, where indicators of exposure tell you the weaknesses, indicators of a compromise basically tells you, hey, these are signs that you have that your environment has already been misused in some way or another. Think about DC Shadow introducing all kinds of weird changes into your Active Directory, and nobody knows who did it. That's the whole reason, because it's a DC Shadow attack. That it's basically a virtual domain controller that introduces changes. There is no change by. Kerberos roasting is very effective, very easy to do, but you need to have a look for it to see if it's going on or not. And that especially occurs when high privileged accounts are being attacked because they have SPNs on their account set. Obviously, there are many more things to do, but again, this is just a technical perspective. It's also important to have a look at the not so technical stuff like backups, solution of those backups, but also restores, the disaster recovery plans you need to have in place, because if you don't have a plan, what are you going to do when you are under attack or have been attacked or even down? The only way to make sure that those plans work is to periodically test them. Also, management, very important. Periodic password resets of your Kerberos TGT accounts, the default domain administrator account, and obviously the directory services restore accounts. What can you do today? Well, obviously you want to have a look at your AD and think, well, this is a bit fluffy and I want to strengthen it from what you see here on screen to some really bad security, from better security perspectives to make sure that it's better protected. What can you do about it? Well, there are a few things that you can think about. An important thing is tiering model. Tiering is about segregating privileged accounts into specific categories, where tier 0 is the highest privilege, managing domain controllers and everything that's similar to a domain controller. Think about your ADFS, think about your Azure AD Connect. Tier 1 being the applications, tiers 2 being the workstations. Think about it, Active Directory from its nature is very, very open. And because it's so open, anyone can see anything and look for anything and then attack as needed. By introducing tiering, you would also be changing permissions to make sure that information is not as visible as it should be. For example, like hiding your tier 0 accounts. Preventing lateral movement. Make sure to implement labs so that the local administrative passwords are changed on a regular basis. The main admin account is a very, very special account. If anything else fails, the default domain admin account is the account that will be able to be used and log on into the environment. It's very special. Therefore, you can also use it as a break class account. It also, because it's so powerful, it needs to be secured properly. I have a blog post around these things, so make sure to look at my blog. As I mentioned before, you need to have procedures in place to reset the passwords of the accounts mentioned on screen. Passwords. Many people have already talked about them. Get rid of them if you have the possibility. If you don't have the possibility yet to get rid of those passwords, strengthen them. For users, use password phrases. For service accounts, use machine-like passwords. And for admins, think what is best, but preferably use passwordless. Implement password settings objects to make sure that for every account type, service accounts, user accounts and admin accounts have appropriate settings to adhere by. And prevent weak passwords by using Entra ID password protection or a third-party solution, which, if I'm not mistaken, is still free, LitNet password protection, which allows you to integrate with have been pawned. Account hygiene. You need to monitor account security continuously, day by day, and clean up as needed, because people make changes, they forget about it, or something is implemented from an historical perspective and then it's not needed anymore. You need to clean up. If it's not needed, clean it up. Certificate templates, certificate authorities. Every single time we are involved in an IR case and try to help a customer, Active Directory certificate authority is always included, because for whatever reason, it looks like people misunderstood the use of certificate templates and their configurations and how things should have been configured. Think about it. It is very common for us to see where it's possible to get a certificate that is provided by certificate templates that allows, for example, the specification of a subject alternate name. Because I'm able to specify a subject alternate name, I can basically impersonate any account in the environment. Your default domain admin account, your CEO, your CIO, anything. And then as soon as I've got that as certificate, I can authenticate. And because I'm able to authenticate, I can impersonate that account. So make sure to always have a deep look at your certificate authority, including the certificate templates configuration and their permissions, because the permissions, it's all sometimes also a messy part of it. Legacy protocols, legacy software, it is basically saying that water is wet, but again, get rid of those, because protocols, software, configurations from the past, not needed, not applicable anymore, get rid of those. And in addition, the other way around is make sure to enable additional protections like signing and extended protection, because those protections are there to enhance the security of the environment. Don't negate them, but try to implement where possible. I forgot to mention legacy protocols like DES, NTLM, V1, SMB V1, get rid of those, because those are the entry points of it to get it into your Active Directory and then present that ransomware note. Complexity. Well, with complexity, the problem is that because it's so complex, maybe not many people understand the thing that is so complex. And because it's so complex, it's also difficult to secure. Again, easy to say, probably more difficult to do, but keep complexity as reduced as possible. Keep it as simple as stupid. Trusts, also a tricky one. We already knew and know from the past. At first, that's what Microsoft told us many years ago. The domain was the security boundary, which appeared not to be true because it's the forest that's the security boundary. There's a condition. As soon as you have a trust, the forest is no longer the security boundary, because if you have a two-way trust, well, you have basically extended the trust to the other forest. But what about if you have a single-way trust, a unidirectional trust? You might think, well, the other forest is trusting me, therefore I can access the data on the other forest, but the other forest cannot access my data. That is not entirely true, because there's a shared password to make sure that the trust works, a unidirectional trust. So with unidirectional trusts, you need to have a look at those if you have them and protect them. And a way to do that is to use, for example, authentication policies, which is possible in Windows Server 2012 R2 and above. You want to know more about it because you don't know what to do, feel free to contact me and I'll guide you on how to do that part, because it's a little bit too technical and too long to explain that whole thing. Important, patch. Vulnerabilities are in software. Software is made by people. People make mistakes, and continuously updates are coming from all kinds of software, Windows, your phones, everything. Make sure to patch. Test your backups. Many people are probably, at least I hope so, to test the backups. Are you having a correct backup? But are people also checking if that backup is okay to be restored? Especially with your domain controllers, you need to check that is that backup usable to restore a domain controller. And restoring a domain controller meaning it's not just restoring a few files. You need to restore the backup and make sure that the domain controller, after being restored from that backup, comes up and running again. If it does, then you have a valid restore. Just restoring a few files is not a valid restore. The valid restore is actually restoring it and make sure that the domain controller comes up back and running. That's just a backup and a restore, but the whole DR drill is meaning restoring your Active Directory from a ransomware attack. Obviously, nobody's going to do that in a production environment, but that's why we have test environments. I hope that people are not using their production environment as test environments, but a separate test environment where you actually are doing the DR drill to make sure that everybody knows what he needs to do at the correct point in time, also with the correct actions. Obviously, preferably once a year that should be done, because your infrastructure changes, and by doing it once a year, you know, is that valid? Is that plan still valid or not, or does it require some adjustments? Because your infrastructure changes, your plan might change. already mentioned between the lines, but it's very important to continuously monitor and check for expected, maybe even unexpected changes in your environment and act upon it as soon as possible, especially the unexpected ones. So think about an attacker adding an account to some group or making some permission changes in your Active Directory. You need to be aware that those things are happening and you need to be notified about it. But also have a look at the security state and posture of both your Active Directory and your Entra ID, so that you know where the weaknesses are and can act upon those. Because if you don't know where the weaknesses are, you obviously cannot act. Why is this so important? Well, Active Directory today, especially in the very large environments, it is a, let's call it the core directory that basically connects everything. In a hybrid environment, it is very likely that companies have Active Directory as the primary identity system, where they basically then synchronize stuff to Entra ID and then maybe even synchronize identities to other systems, or they federate with other systems to provide single sign-on across the whole thing. So the integration from a hybrid identity perspective, it's not a bad thing. The bad thing occurs when you are using accounts from one system to manage the other system. So for example, if you have an Active Directory account to manage your Entra ID, that would mean that if the attacker attacks AD and therefore that account, you would be able to attack Entra ID because that account has permissions in Entra ID. In other words, you need to be very, very careful with those integrations. Make sure that when you manage systems, identity systems, as the ones see on screen, that from a management perspective, the management accounts are always represented only in that environment and not in other environments, because otherwise you will be having the ability of attacking the one environment from the other. Today, if things are set incorrectly, it is possible to attack Entra ID from Active Directory, but it's also possible the other way around. Like, for example, when using Cloud Trust, using the default set of the default configuration, you are able to attack Active Directory from your Entra ID. You want to know more about it? Feel free to contact me offline. And think about it. Active Directory was built and designed today more than 25 years ago, in the 1999 area. It was designed to withstand localized threats, floods, power outages. It was not designed like Azure AD is today. It was not designed for cyber attacks, network threats. It's a different view on how Active Directory should be protected, and that's why it's also so difficult to protect Active Directory, because it was not built for the world of today. And still, many organizations and people are using it. And also keep in mind that many choices that were made in the past because they were valid back then, they might not be valid anymore today. Why? Because it's insecure. Think about old protocols, old settings that shouldn't be there anymore. Make sure to keep that in mind and get rid of those, as I mentioned a few times already. More business reasoning, regulations. For example, in the Netherlands, banks are obligated to have a disaster recovery plan of their AD and probably other systems as part of their business continuity plan. Why? Because especially a few banks in the Netherlands are called the core bankings, the core banks. If those banks go down, the whole country is in deep trouble. So those, especially those banks, need to stay up at whatever cost, because it's going to have a very many issues throughout the country. And it probably does also plays into account in other countries. Complexity. From a technology perspective, it is very complex, but from a management perspective, managers might think, restoring Active Directory, just restore a few backups and you'll be good. In theory, it may look like that, but in practice, it's difficult. I know, because I've done it many times before, and for me, it's easy because I know what to do. But from the other things, it's easy because you need to be prepared. And if you're not prepared, it becomes more complicated. So being prepared is very much part of it. Reinstalling and recovering one domain controller is easy. But if you have to recover an environment that's distributed across the globe, all over the place, I don't know, let's say 100 domain controllers, it's not just restoring the domain controllers, but it's restoring the service, making sure it's up and running again. If you've outsourced your environment, do you have the confidence that your outsourcing party has the knowledge to recover your environment? If you're unsure, make sure to ask them, because they need to be. Risk management. For many, many years, it was very, let's say, unlikely that AD would go down. But these days, it's not more that if, but rather when, because as I mentioned before, there are many, many people trying to attack your AD and to get a foothold in it. Think about it. If your AD is down, are the risks acceptable? And obviously the costs that come with it, because as soon as you're down, you're losing money like crazy. And how long can you keep it up? All kinds of scenarios from an impact and probability perspective. What does it mean? What are the things that can happen? As I mentioned, for many, many years, I was talking about these options with customers. These are the things that could happen when your AD, and that could happen that your AD goes down. How likely are they? What's the probability? And what's the impact on the environment? And to be very honest, I cannot say I encountered one of these. Obviously, there are small things because of mistakes, but throughout the years. But as soon as the first ransomware attacks occurred, this is basically on a day-by-day basis occurring around the globe. And we see it many, many times where environments are basically attacked, breached, destroyed, and action is required. So this is a different ballgame. But then again, looking at the options before, database corruptions. In 23 years, as I mentioned, these things never happened until a company called me about 2 years or so ago and basically told me, hey, our Active Directory, we have an issue. It's still up and running, but every single domain controller has a corrupt database. And that really caught my attention, because in that scenario, when every single domain controller has a corrupt database, that means that you need to go back in time. You need to perform a forced recovery because the database is basically broken. Although it's working, it's broken. Promotions didn't go well, so the only way was to go back in time. Guess what? They had to go back 2 months in time. Why? Because the backups they were creating, they were not testing backups. The backups they were creating, and also not the restores, had the corrupt database. So the corruption started 2 months earlier. And guess what again? They had to perform a forced recovery, and the moment they had to perform the forced recovery, that disaster recovery plan did not work because the restore continuously failed. The service failed. This is not the moment to find out that your disaster recovery plan is not working. In the end, I was able to help them with, let's call it some black magic, but it's not the moment to find out that your plans, your restores, your backups are not working. You need to, let's say, find out before the moment that you need them. When you go down, you have a few options. And one of those options is basically if, and this is the scenario, a ransomware attack. Everything is burned to the ground. What do? Rebuild from scratch is an option. And this basically means reinstall everything, reconfigure everything, recreate all the objects in your Active Directory, rejoin all the servers if you still have servers, rejoin all the clients again if you still have clients, reconfigure permissions, group memberships. Everything needs to be reconfigured as if you were starting a new company today. That will take a huge amount of time, and in my perspective, it's not recommended. However, I also know that some of, let's call it security companies, might suggest that part, but because it gives you more trust. From that perspective, I say, well, it's true. It gives you more trust because everything is new. The attacker doesn't have anything that's new, so only you would have it. Or the attacker only has the let's say, the power over what was already there. However, is this really the moment to rebuild everything? Not in my opinion. That's why I'm not recommending it. So what is the recommended way? Is to recover from backup, restore into an isolated environment, preferably use the most recent backup, and I will explain later why. Assess the security of whatever was restored in that isolated environment, and then categorize into short-term, mid-term, long-term things that need to be fixed. And especially the short-term issues, which are the critical and most important issues, those are the ones that you should focus on in that isolated environment and fixing them before going back into production. And obviously, an isolated environment can mean many things. There are a few options, like really a separate network where nobody can do anything besides you and your colleagues. Obviously, it's about doing stuff without interference from any attacker. And another way to isolate the environment is that, and that's only possible if you already have it, is, for example, if your domain controllers are in a separate network, where you basically isolate that existing network from any interaction from the outside. That's also a way to create an isolated network. What applies to you, I don't know. You have to figure it out to see what the possibilities are and looking at the things that you have available. This is what I would recommend. Why? Because it's faster. You have less downtime. You have less impact, because even though I'm saying less impact, I'm not saying no impact at all. It's less impact, but you'll be faster. You'll be quicker in getting things back up and running, and most of the things will continue to work. You will always have issues. Trust me, that there's no 100% guarantee. But it does require that you are prepared to act upon it. You need to have a plan. You need to know what to do. Those are the DR drills. You need to have the tooling, scripts, third-party tooling, whatever. And again, keep it as simple as stupid. Complexity is a killer for success. Keep it as simple as stupid. It mitigates the risk and the impact. And then you might ask yourself, yeah, but if I restore the environment, what about trust? Well, it is true. That's why I'm saying fix all the critical and most important stuff, because the goal, in my opinion, is to get your business up and running as fast as possible. And as soon as you're up and running again, as fast as possible, in the most secure way possible in that time period available, then you can think about additional actions, because performing a migration or a new installation during a ransomware attack, it's a bad decision. After the attack, then you can think about, okay, do I still trust this environment? Would I like to migrate to a new AD because I don't trust the old one? That's then the decision that you can make if you really want to do it. Not during the attack, because it's a wrong moment for that specific decision. The whole recovery and ransomware is already a big headache to think about. So let's have a look at the options for recovery. When you look at the Microsoft documentation, this is what you get. All kinds of steps that you have to execute manually. I've done this a few times until you get fed up with it and you think, I need to automate. And then when you automate those things, you get, for example, things like these. These are scripts that I built for a customer many, many years ago to automate it in, let's say, do it yourself. It's not 100% automation, but it's more automation than by just clicking through all the steps that you just saw in the previous screen. But the other option, the third option, is the fully automated. You buy a third-party recovery tooling that basically recovers your environment, and you can do something else. Today I'm not doing it, but most of the time when I present a presentation like this one, I start the recovery at the beginning of my presentation, and when I'm done presenting, my environment has been recovered and is up and running again. When I'm using either the first or the second option, I cannot do that because I need to work on it. And with this, I'll basically give everything away to the tool, and the tool takes care of it until it tells me I'm done and everything has been recovered. Let's compare those options. Management. Looking at the left and the middle options, well, maintenance, knowledge, and skills. When you're doing anything manually, you need to know what you're doing. Otherwise, it's going to be very, very difficult. The second option, the middle one, you need to understand on how to maintain it, how to deal with all the changing environment and then incorporating into your scripts. That's where the knowledge goes. Obviously, you also still need to know when and what to do. But the third option, it's fully automated. All the knowledge is in the tool. You just start it, and at the end, it's done. It's easier. Trust me, as I mentioned before, yes, we sell a third-party tooling, but I'm just not talking about us because there are other third-party vendors out there. Make sure to buy a tool because it's a game changer. Orchestration. Many tools allow you to back up Active Directory automatically, but do not allow you to recover a domain controller, recover that backup. And in terms of AD, it's not recovering a DC only. You also need to recover the service. When looking at the first options, it's automatically backing it up, but restoring the backup and the service itself, it depends on how things have been done. But you look at the tool, it performs everything automatically. And that's, again, a game changer. Backup in size. With the 2 on the left, Windows Server backup. On the right, it's proprietary and it's smaller. For example, looking at our tool, we only look at the AD data. We don't care about the operating system. And because we don't care about the operating system, we also don't take malware along. Important to understand is, make sure, whatever tool you take, make sure that the backup and recovery tool are not part of their AD. It should be AD aware, but it should not be AD integrated. And if you ask yourself why, because if you attack your AD, I would be able to attack the backup solution also, which you don't want. It's not the first time that I've seen where a customer has their AD attacked and their backup solution also attacked, because everything is so tightly integrated. Again, you don't want that. High-level way of working, looking at the left 2 options, most of the times you restore a single domain controller per domain, and then you clone and redeploy additional domain controllers. With a tool, you can restore a single, multiple, or redeploy after as you want. Lots of flexibility, many options available. Automation, well, it's obviously, if you do anything manual, it will be slow. You will succeed, but it will be very slow. If you automate, it's faster. If you have a tool, it's even faster. Things not to forget is that when you recover your AD, think about it. You are performing recovery because you were attacked, and because you were attacked, you need to recover. And why were you attacked? Because your configurations were weak. There were weaknesses. So after the recovery, what I'm trying to say is that after the recovery, in whatever scenario, you must perform a security assessment and take any risk mitigating actions to make sure you're not attacked again. Because if you don't do it and you go back into production as after recovery, probably you will doing this exercise in a few weeks again. Preparing for the worst in terms of hybrid identity. Cloud identity, it's an easy one. Hybrid identity, different ballgame. If you have password hash synchronization, you're good to go. There is no real-time dependency with your Active Directory for authentication. Pass-through authentication, different ballgame. It depends on AD being available. So if your AD is down, so is your authentication towards Azure AD or Entra ID. The same applies for federated authentication, like, for example, ADFS, because it heavily depends on AD. It has a real-time dependency. What are the options to fix the latter two? Is to implement password hash synchronization as disaster recovery for authentication as a backup. Only then you would be able to survive that attack and allow authentication during or after the attack by switching from pass-through or ADFS to native authentication. If you don't have password hash sync as a backup, you have an issue and you will have an outage until your AD is back up and running again. These are the scenarios that we find that we within our company have categorized. So we have 3 scenarios, and this is the one that where AD is attacked but still running. What we always do, and it's from an insurance perspective between quotes, is take a backup as soon as possible using our tool. We implement a tool called ESP in this case to get a view of all the changes that are occurring in the environment, so that we get visibility of the things that are happening. We perform a security assessment, as I mentioned before, short, mid, and long term. Everything that's on the short term list is implemented right away to make sure the environment is as secure as possible. And then it's back into production again. But you really must be sure this is even possible. Because if it's not, you get basically into the second scenario where AD is compromised. In this case, we do the initial steps. As I mentioned before, we take a backup, change monitoring tool into the environment to get a visibility. But although the environment is up and running, we still perform the backup, recover into an isolated environment. Again, change visibility into the environment, everything that we have changed. We perform the security assessment in that isolated environment, and we fix whatever needs to be fixed on the short term. And then we turn off the old AD, and then we replace the old AD with the one from the isolated network. I also realize this might not always be feasible for every single environment, but it's something to work with to make sure it could work for your environment, or think about other ways on how you could implement such a scenario. And the third and last scenario that we categorize is AD has been attacked and it's down. It has been burned to the ground. Think about the ransomware note that you saw in the beginning. It can obviously all happen to our customers that have our tooling, but let's call it, honestly, it has all the calls that we have had are from customers that do not have our tooling, and they call us for help because they've been burned to the ground. Well, we cannot take a backup of anything that is already down. So what we try to help is to recover the environment using wherever backup method or option that, because trust me, I've also seen customers that don't have a backup, or the backups have also been compromised in one way or another. So we try to recover the environment, the AD in this case, into the first isolated network. That's where we take the backup using our tool. Again, we only look at the AD data. We don't care about the operating system data. So anything that's ransomware-like in the operating system, we leave behind. We restore into the secondary isolated network. We perform the security assessment, very important after recovery, implement all the high critical changes into that environment, and then we move the thing into the production again. So, preferred backup. AD is burned to the ground. Your backup of yesterday, backup of 10 days ago. Which one do you choose? Well, again, very important too. Any backup that you restore and you would like to go back to production, it's about recovery and security. So after recovery, whatever backup, you need to perform a security assessment to make sure that everything is as secure as possible. Because if you don't, well, you might be doing this exercise again in a few weeks. So what do you prefer? Fix the changes and the mismatches in the restored AD between today and just 1 day ago, or 10 days ago? So think about it. The further you go back in time with your backup, the bigger the changes are compared to today. Think about passwords that are mismatching, accounts not existing, or accounts that are still there. So you will have more and more issues the older the backup is. Therefore, I always prefer to say, keep the gap of differences between today and the backup as small as possible. So if you have a backup of an hour ago, use that one. It is easier to fix the security of a backup after restoring an isolated environment than closing all the gaps. It's a bigger headache to close the gaps. In terms of recovery of Entra ID, everything is in sync, and then it's ransomware. You perform a forced recovery, and then it's down. What do you do? And as you can see, objects are missing. If you would just enable synchronization, it could mean, and this is an assumption where the synchronization is still up and running and it's not down, because it can be Cloud Sync or Connect Sync, because the synchronization doesn't see those objects anymore. They have not been deleted, but they are not in the app in the backup because they were created after the backup. It might cause deletions in your Entra ID, which from a user perspective might be impactful for that user. From a group perspective, well, users are in the recycle bin, the groups are not. So very, very, very tricky. And because the groups are not in the recycle bin in Entra ID, the synchronized ones at least, they're gone forever. So think about the licensing group suddenly disappear, and then everybody loses their license because the group was deleted. What you need to do is basically recreate the objects, perform the gap analysis using Entra ID, and see what is missing in AD, create the objects, making sure they have the immutable ID, technical story, but then in the end, you would be okay, and it could be enable synchronization again. It's a lot of work. At this point in time, I'm automating this as much as possible, and I will blog about it at some point in time, but it's just a lot of work, trust me. Be prepared for this. Real life scenario, just 5 minutes left, and I think I can do it in 5 minutes because it's just a few slides. This is about a customer calling us, requiring help, and let's keep it short. We started with scenario 1, where we tried to fix the environment live, and then at some point in time, we basically turned into scenario 2, where we performed a recovery, and this is what we did. The AD was compromised, was attacked and compromised. One of the things we did immediately, as I mentioned before, was to create a backup and also immediately restore that backup in an isolated environment. At this point in time, we did not know if we would need it or not. It was just, let's just do these few steps with a few colleagues, because if we need to do them, we are prepared to continue with that restore. At that point in time, we've continued with the live environment. But also, one of the things we did is prevent changes. Freeze the environment, make sure there are no changes anymore. And then when you think about no changes, think about passwords. Those continuously change for users when they're forced to change the password, but also computers and also GMSA. So what we did is prevent the change of passwords or refuse the change of passwords to keep everything as is as much as possible. We created the backups. Well, this is a little bit of a commercial thing, not important right now. We performed the vulnerability analysis using a few tools. This is about 1.5 years ago. We used Purple Knight to understand the static changes. We used Certify to get a deeper understanding of certificate templates. And we used Bloodhound for the attack path analysis. And this is what we saw. The main computers were allowed to change certificate templates. Think about it. I'm an admin on a computer. Because I'm an admin on a computer, I can impersonate that computer. Because I can impersonate that computer, I would be allowed to change the certificate template, then issue a certificate myself, and then impersonate the default domain admin account. Game over. It's so easy. Help desk account, which was configured to reset the password of all kinds of other accounts. Sounds feasible, but the other way around was implemented. Everyone was basically allowed to reset the password of the help desk account, which was allowed to reset the password of the other accounts. In other words, everybody was allowed to reset the password of everyone. And then we found out it's not one attacker, but it's multiple attackers. Oops. After performing the vulnerability analysis, we decided, let's continue with the use of the compromised ID and restore and harden the environment as much as possible. That's what we did. Implemented all kinds of things. After implementing those kinds of things, we shut down the old AD. We moved the restored AD back into the production environment. We had to reboot all the servers because of the secure channels and the Kerberos tickets. And then everything afterwards worked very nicely. That customer today is very happy, and they're still up and running and successful because we helped them get away from that attack. They survived, as I mentioned. Recommendations, takeaways. I think throughout the presentation, I think you could see a call out. Make sure to be prepared. Being prepared means it will save you time, lots of work, and especially also many headaches. Proactively, you need to secure your environment with identity threat detection tools. Make sure to assess and monitor security, but also act in near real time. If you're too late, it's the other guy that's in time, not you. Make sure to be in time. You need to win the story, not the other guy. Reactively, being able to secure. It's not about AD only. You need to include everything that depends on your Active Directory, not from a technology perspective, but also from a process perspective, the so-called non-technical stuff. Think about it. People, process, and tools. It's about the whole thing. It's not just the technology that you need to take into account. Also, when there's an attack, think about possible or immediate pre-actions to mitigate any impact or risk. It's about being prepared. If you're not prepared, you might not be able to know what to do, but also post-actions, like improving security immediately after the recovery, but also the ability to perform a gap analysis, as I mentioned before, and then recreate the objects to make sure that there's no impact on the user ID. Get help before the attack, not after. Obviously, after many will help, but before it's easier and less impactful. Make sure to have password hash synchronization. Again, gap analysis and fix. Automate as much as possible. It will save you a huge amount of time, and also think about other systems like Azure AD Connect and ADFS. Use tools and scripts. Make sure to have procedures. Validate your backups and exports. Perform disaster recovery drills. Make sure to have a plan to be able to use those, not just for reality, but also when you are performing that drill. and watch out for integrations. Prevent cross-contamination from one tier 0 to the other one. And this was it. Thank you so much. If you have any questions, please let me know. I'm looking to the chats. I'm not seeing anything. Well, let me wrap it up then. Thank you so much for listening to my presentation. If you have any questions, feel free to contact me with whatever question you might have, and hope to talk to you. Thank you so much. Have a great day.